I hope you enjoyed that music. I see a few people that have come back from vacations, so that's a good sign. Hopefully by September we'll be back at full strength. This is one of those sermons that most preachers in this country would disagree with, and this is one of those sermons that, you hesitate to preach because in this country you are welcome to criticize your own country, but you're not welcome to criticize the state of Israel no matter what. If you do, the repercussions on a social level are generally high, and you're usually labeled as an anti-Semite. But I think I have Semite blood in me, so I can be a little more objective than most. This is a major issue, and I decided to preach on this because of the events that are taking place in Israel right now. So for a few minutes we will talk about what's going on there right now. Then we are going to look at the history, and then we will look at the future. So this will probably take 35-40 minutes. I have a couple of pictures here that are, if you're squeamish, you don't want to look at them. So I'll tell you when they're coming. They'll be right at the beginning of the sermon. This is a very general, broad message because I have realized that as I was preparing for this message that we are looking at 5,000 years of history. So I've decided to give you a broad picture rather than to go into great details on many of these things. I may miss things in this sermon, and I may not cover everything the way everybody would like me to, but it is what it is. I hate that saying, it is what it is, because you can always do better, right? But we'll just go over this and look at this and see then. My goal at the end of this sermon is to come to some kind of a conclusion as to what we as Christians should do in regard to this whole issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and whether or not it affects us in terms of our beliefs as to the second coming of Jesus and all of those events in the last days. So Israel in the last days, present day, right now, you can see this is taken right this morning. I took this off of the news lines. It says Israel and Hamas are back at war as talks on new ceasefire remain deadlocked. And then the next one is, in 4 weeks of violence, more than 1,900 Gazans have been killed. And you know that, 1,900, almost 2,000 people have been killed. And Israel has decided to retaliate against what they believed was, against what they saw as a threat against their nation. If you remember, 3 teenagers were abducted some time ago by some Palestinians, and they were killed, 3 Israeli teenagers. And that basically exploded this whole area into major conflict. Originally, the government of Israel said that Hamas was behind those killings, and it turned out that it wasn't. It was just random. And then a week or 2 later, a Palestinian teenager was kidnapped by Israeli settlers and set on fire and killed in that way. So these kinds of things just happen in this country all the time because you have 2 peoples, and this is the key here. You have 2 different peoples, and by the way, I'm going to talk about whether really they are that different from each other. But you have 2 groups of people claiming the same piece of land, and it's a small piece of land. So the next picture is the picture of basically the bombing. Israel is now sending airplanes and basically targeting the areas that they say where the Hamas is. The only problem is if you say that the Hamas is here in this house next door, and if you send an airplane to bomb it, you're probably going to kill everybody in this church at the same time because that house is only 50 feet away from us, So that's what's been happening over there. They say that they're targeting these militants, but as a result, the civilians are dying. So out of those 1,900 people that have died so far until this morning, a majority have been civilians. The next 2 pictures are very graphic. If you don't want to see them, then turn around. I guess it's too late. They are already on the screen. And the second one is even more graphic than this one, and you can show that real quick. And, if you go online and if you enter, you can go to the next slide. We don't need to leave that on there forever. By the way, that's how many Israelis have died so far. 67, and out of those 67, 64 were soldiers and 3 are civilians. If you go online and if you enter dead Palestinian children, you will see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures of dead Palestinian kids. As you know, several schools have been targeted, and the Israeli government basically says that it's because the Hamas is hiding inside of those schools. Well, once the dust settles and you go in there, they start pulling out kids out of those schools, you know. So that's what's going on. You can see pictures, and then you can also see the same type of carnage in Israel when a suicide bomber, you know, a Palestinian, wraps himself around with bombs and walks into a crowded bus in Tel Aviv and blows himself up. Then you can see the pictures of dead Israeli children, and you can see the carnage that happens on that side. So both sides can say that they are being attacked and that the other group is merciless, and they try to demonize each other, and they try to say how the other groups are just so violent and they are not human, what they are doing to us. So this is what's, in general terms, this is what's going on over there right now. These are the facts. 1900 dead, and it is continuing to happen, and Hamas is lobbing rockets back into Israel as we speak. So that's just the reality on the ground. President Obama said Israel has the right to defend itself, which is fine. I agree with that statement. I also think he should have said a little something about all the kids that died on the Palestinian side, and he chose to remain silent about it. I have not at least heard anything from him about it. As I said, in this country, even the President of the United States cannot say anything bad about Israel because the repercussions are just going to be huge in terms of money, finances, power, I mean, all kinds of issues. In my opinion, right now, the most powerful person on this planet is Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he is more powerful than anybody else. And this is just now my opinion. This is not a theological statement or based on the Bible, but this is how I feel things are right now. This is the situation that we are dealing with. World opinion. When you look at the world opinion, and I don't think that many Americans are aware of this, Israel and Iran share the most negative ratings in the global poll. And they have polled a bunch of countries all over, different countries from different continents, Africa, South America, Asia, Australia, North America. I mean, they polled all kinds of countries. And right now, Iran and Israel have the most negative ratings of all of the countries on this planet, 200 plus countries on this planet. Now let me give you a result of another poll that may totally surprise and shock you, and this is the next one. The United States has been voted as the most significant threat to world peace in a survey across 68 different countries. That's our country. That's our country, you know, and when other people look at us from other countries, and again, they polled 68 countries, people from 68 countries on all continents. So, you can't say these were just the people from the Middle East countries. They're from all different continents of the world, and this is what people see when they look at the United States. Now, we go to a little bit of history between Israel and Palestinians. And I chose this as the first beginning point because I want everybody to understand who the Israelis and Palestinians are. And the study of a high-resolution haplotypes, and that's, I guess, a genetic word that I don't understand very good. But basically, this study demonstrated, and this was done by several different universities, demonstrated that a substantial portion of chromosomes of Israeli Jews and of Palestinian Muslim or Arabs belong to the same chromosome pool. In other words, this is not just something that is specific to Israelis and Palestinians. In other words, what this basically says is they are cousins or brothers or relatives. They're related. There is no other way to explain it. They are just related. But this is not just specific to them. When you look around the world at all of the conflicts in the world, for example, right now there is a conflict between Russians and the Ukrainians. Well, Russians and Ukrainians are cousins in the same way as Jews and Palestinians are. In my country, Yugoslavia, we had a war between Croatians and Serbs. Same thing. They are cousins. They are relatives. And what has happened with most of these people or peoples who used to be the same at one time, the religion has divided them. For example, in my country, one part of the country at one time during its history was ruled by the Northern European, and they became Catholic. And the other part of the country was under the Russian Orthodox influence, and they became Russian Orthodox. And yet another part of the country was ruled by the Turks, and they became Muslim. So all of a sudden in this country of 25 million people who are basically genetically the same, you have one group that says, I'm a Muslim, and another says, I'm a Catholic, and another one says, I'm an Orthodox. And you have the same thing in Ireland and England. Basically the same kinds of people who live there on that piece of land forever. What is it that is separating them? It is their religion. So most of these wars come as a result of the religion. Genesis 17:20, we go all the way back now. We go 5,000 years back. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and I want to tell you a little bit something about Ishmael that I think you probably already know, but this is interesting to me. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you, God, this is God speaking, I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers. And how many rulers was there in Israel? How many tribes? 12. And I will make him into a great nation. So right away from the very beginning, you have the creation of two different nations basically in the same geographical areas. And when we read the Bible, we read all about the Israelites conquering the land and taking it and possessing it and all of that stuff. But one thing that you can read in between the verses, in between the lines, so to speak, is that always throughout the history of Israel, there was other people living there on that same piece of land. Other people, they called them Gentiles, they called them Philistines, they called them Moabites, they called them, there was hundreds of different tribes that came from Ishmael, that came from Esau, that were not Jewish. They were not Jews, but they lived on that same piece of land. So basically that tells you that Israel has shared the Palestinian land, Palestine, with other peoples from the very beginning for the last 5,000 years. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that day. That was an interesting thing to me, that Ishmael was circumcised. Another text, when Abraham died, it says that both his sons buried him, his son Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite. In other words, both were there when he died and both buried him. They were involved in his life. Abraham loved his son Ishmael just like he loved all of his other kids. That's something that you have to understand. And to this day, when you're talking to people who are of a Muslim faith, Arabs of a Muslim faith, they consider Abraham as their father. The same as Jews, the same thing. They consider Abraham as their father, and they consider Old Testament as a holy book. Why? Because it talks about their history. Now, one thing that you have to know about Islam is they also believe in progressive revelation, which means that the Old Testament, even though it's a holy book and it's a good book, it's not the latest revelation from God. And they believe that the latest revelation from God is the book that Muhammad wrote, Quran, and that's what they use for their daily living and so on. But they still accept the Old Testament as a part of their history, and Abraham as their forefather. Ishmael, he lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. To this day, many Arab citizens of Israel, including Palestinians, are bilingual and fluent in Hebrew. In other words, they speak both languages. They speak their language, an Arabic dialect, and they also speak Hebrew. Can you already see a picture developing here where you see basically two cousins, really, brothers, separating and going in different directions and possessing the same land and living together side by side. When we are talking about Abraham, we're talking about 5,000 years back into the past. Our country, the United States, is how old? 200 and some years? And here we're talking about a 5,000-year history. I mean, imagine living next to somebody for that long of a time. So that's how long they've been on that same piece of land. Since the time of the Muslim conquest in the 7th century, religious conversions have resulted in Palestinians. When you want to ask yourself who the Palestinians are, here is the answer. Becoming mostly Sunni. Who are the Sunnis? Sunni is a sect of Islam that Saddam Hussein was a part of when he was alive. Sunni is the same group that is right now that has overrun Iraq. You remember Iraq? Now, Iraq is the country that was invaded by President Bush, basically on his own initiative when he decided to go in there and used all kinds of unrelated excuses and reasons for going into that country. They opposed Saddam, and they said that it was going to be a flourishing, prosperous country, and today it has completely disintegrated. It has split up into hundreds of pieces, and these people, these Sunnis, they have come back with vengeance and killed everybody who was against them. And the old generals who used to be in Saddam Hussein's army are now running this major revolt against everybody else in that country, and they have basically declared a creation of a whole new Islamic country there in Iraq and Syria, and they have set their eyes on a conquest of all of those lands. So finally, yesterday, the United States, President Obama gave one more of those "we are exceptional" speeches, and we're going to go help these people, and we're going to go to war in order to create peace. One of those ridiculous statements that both governments have used, Republican and Democrats. You think one is going to be better than the other, and then you realize that they all do the same thing. And here we are. The United States now officially, as of this morning, is in another war. We have begun bombing once again in Iraq. What effect is that going to have on you, on your pocketbook, on the stock market, and everything else is yet to be seen, but we are officially now entered yet another war. So Palestinians, they are Sunni, mostly Sunni. In other words, ISIS, the group that is now controlling Iraq, is in favor of Palestinians. And if they could, they would help them. So all of a sudden, we are now getting involved in this yet another war. And the only way to win a war like this is to send 100,000 troops over there. And I wouldn't be surprised if that escalates to that point. So anyways, that's another topic. 5 centuries before Christ, this is now the history of the Palestinians. Herodotus, a Greek historian, makes no distinction between Jews and other inhabitants of Palestine. In other words, 5 centuries before Christ, who do we have in Palestine? You have King Solomon, right? You have the Davidic dynasty, kings who have come after David and King Solomon. They're ruling the Palestine, you see. And Herodotus, the Greek historian, he makes no distinction between Jews and other people who are living in that land. In other words, he sees them as all the same. In other words, my point is that all along for 5,000 years, Jewish people and the other people, the ones that we call Palestinians now, they have been coexisting together on that same piece of land for the last 5,000 years. The history clearly shows that. So what happens? You remember Jesus. Jesus came to this earth and he spoke and he brought his message of salvation and grace and so on. And at one point, Jesus predicted that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. And that actually happened in AD 70. If Jesus was 33 or 34 years, when he died, so this would have happened about 30, 35 years after Jesus went back to heaven. Jerusalem was destroyed. The siege the siege ended with the sacking of the city and the destruction of its famous second temple. That was the temple that King Solomon had built. In other words, that temple that King Solomon had built had stood on that mountain there, until the time of Jesus. And in AD 70, it was destroyed. The destruction of both the first and second temples is still mourned annually as the Jewish fast, not feast, fast, Tisha B'Av. And this is to this day, they are mourning the loss of their temples. And the Jewish Orthodox religious people, they're hoping that they will rebuild the temple once again on that same place. The only problem is that right now on that same location, you have a mosque. And this mosque is one of the most famous mosques in the world, and it is considered as a holy place by 1.5 billion Muslims that surround the nation of Israel. So that's the only little problem that you have with that whole situation there. The account of Josephus described Titus, who was a general, Roman general, as moderate in his approach when he was besieging Jerusalem. And the reason why they attacked Israel is because Jewish nation, if you remember, during the time of Jesus, was under the control and under the occupation of the Roman forces. You remember that, right? And they had to pay taxes to the Romans. And every once in a while, they would rebel against the Romans. And they would have a rebellion. Well, they had one of those rebellions that basically ended up in a loss of many Roman soldiers. And the government in Rome decided to put down these uprisings once and for all. And in AD 66, they sent General Titus with his huge army against the city of Jerusalem. And that siege lasted for 4 years. And in AD 70, we have an account here that this general was moderate in his approach, and after conferring with others, ordered that a 500-year-old temple should be spared. In other words, he says, when you destroy the city, spare the temple, because it has the historical significance. It's one of those buildings. Romans, they were very sensitive to the pieces of art and to the architecture and so on. And they tried to preserve it in all of the countries that they conquered. So this same thing happened here when they were attacking Jerusalem. He decided to spare it, but according to Josephus, who was a historian, Jewish historian, the Roman soldiers grew furious with Jewish attacks and tactics, and against Titus' orders, set fire to an apartment adjacent to the temple, which soon spread all throughout, and the temple was completely destroyed at that point. You remember what Jesus says? Not a stone will be left on top of the stone. So the temple was completely destroyed, and to this day, when you go into the city of Rome, there is the Arch of Titus, and this is celebrating the Roman sack of Jerusalem and the temple, and this still stands in Rome to this day, celebrating their victory over the Jewish people at that time. Now, some people say that at that time in AD 70, the Rome decided that Jews were not going to be allowed in Israel anymore, and that's not true, because Jews did continue to live in Israel for a while, but they kept these uprisings against the Romans, and the 2nd century saw 2 further Jewish revolts against the Roman rule. And the first one was in 115, that was the Kitos War, and that was followed by the more fierce Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 to 136, led by Simon Bar Kokhba. Now, Judea at that time was completely ravaged. This time when Romans came back, first time they were mean, second time they were worse. So when they came back, Judea was completely ravaged, while Julius Severus and Emperor Hadrian crushed the rebellion. According to Cassius Dio, 580,000 Jews were killed, and 50 fortified towns and 985 villages were razed. In 131, Emperor Hadrian renamed Jerusalem, gave it a completely new city, Aelia Capitolina, and constructed a temple of Jupiter on the site of the former Jewish temple, Jews were banned from Jerusalem, and Roman Judea was renamed Syria Palestina, from which we have the word Palestine. That's what happened in the 2nd century. At that point, Jews have lost the control of their land. Up to that point, they were in control of that land, and Palestinians, they were a minority. Jews had a king, they had a ruler. Even when they were occupied by Romans, they were still in charge of their affairs as long as they paid taxes. But everybody else who was a non-Jew was considered a minority. And that was Palestinians, and that was people who were descendants of Esau and the descendants of Ishmael and all of the other tribes that were living there side by side with them. Now, you have next 1,800 years. The next 1,800 years I have on one slide. Can you believe that? I was able to put 1,800 years on one slide. You have 3 centuries of Christianity. And then in 7th century, Islam started taking root and spreading all over the Middle East. And then you have 5 centuries of Islam. And remember, Israel doesn't exist as a nation now. What did we say? 3 centuries of Christianity, and then 5 centuries of Islam. That's 800 years. And then 3 centuries of Crusades. This is when the Catholic Church decided that they needed to free the city of Jerusalem from the Muslims, and they sponsored these Crusader wars against the Muslims, and for 3 centuries they fought these wars. Imagine living in a country where there is 300 years of continual war. Imagine living in a whole generation. From the day you were born until the day you die, there is always war. This is what they went through. And Jews and Palestinians still living there. Except at this point, for all of these centuries, Jews have become the minority in what once used to be their country. And then 7 centuries of Islam again, under the Turks, the Turkish Ottoman Empire, and then finally the British took over for 30 years, and then Israel was created in 1948 as a result of the United Nations deciding to give Israelis a country of their own. And you remember why that happened is because Hitler and Nazis, they decided to exterminate all the Jews in Germany and Europe. And by the time they did that, by the time they were all done, they killed over 6 million Jews, European Jews in Europe. And Jews at that time felt like they had no place to go. No place to go. Because even after the World War II, Jews were not welcomed back with open arms to many of these countries. And they did not want to live in many of these countries. Imagine if you were a Jew in Ukraine or my country, Croatia too, did similar things, or France, Imagine if you were a Jew back then and you get handed over to Nazis and they take you to a concentration camp and they kill you. Now, if you survive that and your family has been killed, do you want to go back live to that country that handed you over to the Nazis? Do you want to go live back in France or any one of those countries that did that to you? You don't want to do that. So they had no place to go. So at that point, United Nations decided, okay, there is still a minority Jewish population in Israel. Let's just create the state of Israel. And all the Jewish people who are living in Europe can have a land of their own. And that's what they did in 1948. Israel was created as a nation. And immediately, the moment it was created, the Palestinians who were living there, they didn't like the idea. The Arabs who were living there, they didn't like the idea. And there was immediate rebellion against the state of Israel. Can you imagine now, you as a rational person, you can put yourself into shoes of a Jewish person who is trying to escape Europe and wants to go to his own land. You can do that. You can put yourself into the shoes of that person. Now put yourself into the shoes of a Palestinian who's lived on his land for the last 5,000 years, and all of a sudden this Jewish guy from Hungary comes and says, I'm going to live here too. I'm going to be your neighbor. But not only that, pretty soon he says, how about I live in your house? Because there isn't enough land. Palestine is extremely small. And all of a sudden you had influx of millions of Jewish people coming in from all over the world. Where are they going to live? So at that point, you had basically ethnic cleansing that was done, and many Palestinian villages were just emptied, and cities and towns, and renamed, given Jewish names, and the Palestinian people to this day, you have over 2 million Palestinian refugees living in Jordan and living in many countries. And they are debating. The state of Israel has accepted the number of 700,000, and they say that they expelled 700,000 Palestinians from the land. Palestinians claim that it was 3 million, so who's to know? The number is probably somewhere in between, right? So let's say 1 million people was expelled, and all of a sudden now you have 2 distinct, different neighbors living next to each other. We live in Denver, right? We have a diverse population here. Sometimes you have a neighbor who moves into your next door to you, and maybe you're an Anglo white, and all of a sudden you have a neighbor who comes from Mexico. And on Sunday morning he has a barbecue and he turns on his music. How does that feel? And that's why we have race problems in this country, because I don't want to listen to that music. And by the same token, he don't want to listen to my music. This is just a simple overgeneralization of in Palestine, this happened to be much worse. So what happened at that time is that Israelis, Jewish people are coming in by droves, and they are taking over the Palestine land. And in 1967, you have a 6-day war. In other words, you have a war when a bunch of Arab countries got together and they said, we have to defend our Palestinian brothers and we have to go to war against Israel. And Israel defeated them all, obviously had the American help, big time. Defeated them all, and at that point, Israel, the government of Israel, the nation of Israel, takes complete control of the Palestine. Except they have a problem that they have several million Palestinians living on that same land still to this day, and they are now a minority. So Israelis are a majority, Palestinians are a minority. As of 2013, Israel has been condemned in 45 resolutions by the United Nations Human Rights Council since its creation in 2006. The Council has resolved almost more resolutions condemning Israel than on the rest of the world combined. And the reason for these condemnations is very simple. The international law says that Israel shall not expand their territory into Palestinian territory. The international law says that Israel shall negotiate with the Palestinians and create a Palestinian state. Except the Israeli government has a different policy in place. They call it the reality on the ground. And their reality on the ground is, if a Jewish person lives here, then this is ours. So their attempt has been to confiscate the land, push the Palestinians out, and build the settlements, Israeli settlements on that land. And this is the crux and the reason for the conflict. Somebody comes to you, your neighborhood, destroys your house and builds another house on it, and you can't live in it, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. And this is one of those problems that just cannot be. The Palestinians and Israelis, they keep going in circles for the last 60 years. Israel says, well, they don't want to recognize us as a country and they want to destroy us, and how can they are not a faithful negotiator and we can't negotiate with them? And the Palestinians, they say, well, they took all of our land and they kicked us out and we can't negotiate with them, we can't trust them. In the United States, it says, hey, let's make a deal, and then basically supports Israel. The United States has unconditionally supported Israel since 1948. Unconditionally, without any questions asked. And don't listen to the words, look at the actions. The billions of dollars that go there for help and the military and so on. Anyways, the United Nations General Assembly has adopted a number of resolutions. Now listen to this one. Saying that the strategic relationship with the United States encourages Israel backing of the United States, encourages Israel to pursue aggressive and expansionist policies and practices. And it's true. Israel knows they don't have to worry about nothing. Why? Because the United States is always going to have their back. And if they want to spread farther, they can do that. So, in a nutshell, the problem is that both Palestinians and Israelis claim the land. That's in a nutshell. They claim that same land. Israel is winning that battle. How does it work? How does this whole thing work? You know, you can become a citizen of Israel if you want to. You can apply for the citizenship. You're going to have to be circumcised. And you can become an Israeli. I have a friend, a Yugoslavian friend, Serbian, who decided to become an Israeli citizen, and he went to Israel and he applied and he got circumcised and he became a citizen. Now, if he comes from Serbia over there and if he says, I want to live here in this country, then the government is obliged to provide him with a housing. Where the heck is he going to live? Where is he going to live? Where are they going to put him? It's a small piece of land. It's a small piece of land. The only place where they can put him is on a land that the United Nations has said, we're going to save this land for the Palestinians, for their own country. So they build another settlement to put all of these other people who are coming still to this day, who are coming from other parts of the world into Israel, you know. And the Palestinians, then they lobby these rockets into Tel Aviv. You know, and then the Israelis, they say, see, they're killing us. They're killing our kids. They're bombing our houses. And by international law, building these settlements that Israel is building is illegal. It's illegal. International law doesn't support it, but the United States always looks the other way. There has not been one resolution yet in the history of the United Nations, one resolution that was that was put together against Israel that the United States did not veto. Every single resolution that was ever put in place condemning the actions of Israel was vetoed by the ambassador of the United States. Why? Because the United States is giving them the unconditional support. Why? And that's the question, why? Now we go to theological reasons, and I would like to give you the reason why. Why is this happening? So all of that history, now we finally get back into theology of things. Dispensationalism. How many of you have heard that word, dispensationalism? You heard that word? Dispensationalism is a movement that was started some time ago in the United States, and dispensationalists. How many of you has ever heard of the books or read the books Left Behind? Left Behind series, movies. That's based on the dispensational theology. And I'm just going to put it in a very simple, short, as I said, this sermon is very broad, general. I can't go into details because there is just too much material here. But in a nutshell, dispensationalists believe that the nation of Israel is distinct from the Christian church and that God has yet to fulfill his promises to national Israel. That's what the dispensationalists believe. They believe that the country of Israel, the nation of Israel, has a role to play in the second coming of Jesus. That's what they believe. And the books and the series Left Behind became extremely popular in the United States. Millions of those books have been sold. Everybody has seen the movies. And this is what they teach. These promises include the land promises, which in the future world to come result in a millennial kingdom and third temple where Christ upon his return will rule the world from Jerusalem for 1,000 years. They're serious. This is not, these people are not joking. This is what they believe. They believe that when Jesus comes, the nation of Israel is going to be reestablished, the temple is going to be rebuilt, and Jesus is going to rule the whole world from that temple, from the Jerusalem, for the next 1,000 years. And as a result, the American Protestants are literally sending billions of dollars of support to the nation of Israel because this is what they believe. And the nation of Israel and the rabbis and the Orthodox Jews, they accept that money. What they don't tell the American Protestants is that there is a little minor issue that they have with this whole theology, and that's basically that they don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. They don't say that part. We don't accept Jesus. But, you can go online, go on YouTube, and just punch in rabbis on Jesus. Just punch in that, and you will see what they feel and believe about who Jesus is and whether or not Jesus is going to come back and so on. I don't want to go in that. You can do your own research on that. But the Orthodox Judaism does not believe that Jesus was a Messiah, does not believe that Jesus is coming back. They do believe that the Messiah is coming back. And they do believe that that Messiah is going to reestablish the nation of Israel as the most predominant nation on the planet. And they believe that Messiah is definitely not going to be Jesus. So that's what they believe. But the most destructive belief here is that Jesus will come only after the temple is rebuilt and all of the Palestine is restored to Israel. If you are an American Christian and if you believe this, how do you feel then about Palestinians? You can't build a temple as long as they're there. If you're an American Protestant and you believe that the temple needs to be rebuilt in order for Jesus to come, aren't you going to preach a sermon to go bomb the Palestinians? Aren't you going to preach a sermon to go expel them all from Israel? Aren't you going to preach a sermon to destroy the mosque over there, the Black Mosque, and to put the temple on it? You're not going to preach peace. You're not going to say, let's pray for peace in Israel. Because as long as there is peace, according to your beliefs, Jesus is not coming back. In other words, you have to have war. And in this particular case, you're looking at the war on a world scale. And the reason is because Israel, the small country as it is surrounded by 1.5 billion Muslims. Now, the United States is a pretty powerful country, right? I mean, we've proven that. We've proven that we can move 500,000 soldiers in a matter of 8 weeks to Iraq. We can do a lot of things. You're talking about 1.5 billion Muslims. So many American Protestants are actually trying to get this war to start. And they would love to see this whole area just explode into violence. Because then the United States would get involved, Russia would get involved, we would win, and then we could build a temple, and then Jesus is going to come, and then we're going to have peace. It's that whole logic of let's go bomb somebody so that we can protect peace. Let's go to war so that we can preserve peace. Who came up with that kind of logic? Let's go to war so we can have peace. I think if you want to have peace, you should negotiate. I think if you want to have peace, you should have some give and take. And the other side is not any better. I'm not defending one side or the other here. Everybody wants their own piece of land. Everybody wants to be in power. Human beings want to be in charge of their own destiny. And that's why we have all of these wars. As Jesus was leaving the temple, what did Jesus say about all of these things? As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of the disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. Do you see all these great buildings?" Replied Jesus, "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." Jesus never, ever, in the New Testament, you can read everything Jesus ever said. He never talked about the future Israeli kingdom. Just not in his words. As a matter of fact, Jesus said something totally different. In John 18:36, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." Jesus doesn't believe in earthly kingdoms. Jesus doesn't love Jewish people more than Palestinian people. Jesus doesn't love American people more than Russian people. God looks at everybody the same. He loves everybody equally. Everybody. Jews and Gentiles, Jews and Palestinians. Everybody has the same favor in the eyes of God. Luke 9:22, and he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests. And he was rejected by his own people and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day he will be raised from the dead. Revelation 21, I don't know how many of you ever noticed this text. I did not see a temple in the city of New Jerusalem. Revelation 21 talks about the New Jerusalem coming out of heaven, adorned as a bride. I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. How does God feel about all of this? Does God need to wait for some temple to be built before Jesus comes? Does God need one country in this world to conquer everybody else before a second coming of Jesus? I mean, when you look at the history of, I got to tell you, Jewish people, they had a special place in God's plans and in God's history. But not at the exclusion of God loving everybody else. Because you can see what he told to Ishmael. I was going to make him a big nation as well, and bless his descendants as well. And God says, all people are my people, and all kingdoms are my kingdoms. Romans 2:28 says, a person is not the Jew who is one only outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly. And the circumcision is circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. You're not a Jew because you live in Israel or because you're circumcised. You're a Jew because you are a child of God. I consider myself a Jew in a spiritual sense. I consider myself a Jewish person in a spiritual sense. Why? Because God accepts me for who I am. And God sent Jesus so that the gospel could be preached to Gentiles as well as to the Jews. But the Lord said to Ananias, this is in reference to Apostle Paul, go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. In other words, the gospel was going to be preached to everybody. It was not going to be contained just within one group of people. When they heard this, they had no further objection and praised God, saying, so then even to Gentiles God has granted repentance that leads to life. I don't care if you're a Jew or Gentile. I don't care if you're a Jew or Palestinian. You have the same opportunity for salvation if you accept Jesus Christ. Same. In God's eyes, you're the same. Jesus, the disciples of Jesus, they were hoping that Jesus was going to create this big earthly kingdom. And the whole point, if you study Jewish theology and Jewish interpretation of the Bible, the whole point is that the Messiah is going to create this famous kingdom that is going to be successful. Do you know what one of the objections is to Jewish people, not Jewish people, but Jewish theologians not believing that Jesus was a Messiah? The first thing they'll tell you is the Bible predicts that Messiah is going to be successful, and Jesus was not successful. He died on the cross. He was not able to create this kingdom that they wanted. Well, they didn't realize that Jesus was saying, my kingdom is not of this world. In other words, Jesus did create the spiritual kingdom when he came, and we are all part of that spiritual kingdom. They were hoping for their own throne, for their own piece of property on this planet. So that's the main objective of the Jewish theologians to Jesus being the Messiah. He was not successful. He was never able to do what the Bible says that the Messiah was going to do. They didn't realize that Jesus was creating the kingdom that was far surpassing the boundaries of the country that they imagined they were going to have. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. Palestinians are equal to the Jews. One thing that I want to say today is I am totally against this teaching and preaching that Palestinian people are somehow less than Jewish people and it's okay to kill them. And that somehow they have caused this and brought this upon themselves and it's okay to send airplanes over there and just bomb indiscriminately. I don't agree with that. I think all people are equal in God's eyes, and God is offering salvation to all people equally. I think they should be negotiating for peace. That's what I think. And I think there are only two options. One option, option A, is Palestinians get their own country. Option B is Palestinians become full citizens of Israel with all of the rights and privileges. The right of movement, the right of trade, the right of jobs, the right of living where they want to live, not where they are told to live. Those are the only two options. You know what the third option is? World War III. World War III. And then everybody suffers. And then nobody gets nothing. Now, as a Christian, what should I be praying for? Should I be praying for the Israelis to win and build a temple on that holy mountain? I don't think so. I'm praying for peace. I think as Christians, we should support the rights of both sides. We should support the rights of innocent people on both sides. You know, you have politicians in Hamas and politicians in Jerusalem who are both crooked and who are both doing things that are destroying their own people. And then you have ordinary Israelis and ordinary Palestinians trying to raise their kids and send them to school and have enough food on their table and just live a life. And it's just not happening for either one of them. I think as Christians, we ought to pray for peace. We ought to pray that God Himself, because at this point, I think the things are going, I think at this point, only the intervention from God can bring some kind of peace to this part of the world. What is going to happen? What is going to happen? I believe that there is a strong chance that there is going to be a war, a major war. I believe that there is a strong chance, according to prophecy, that the whole world is going to get involved. I believe that there is a strong chance that there is going to be the trouble like it was not since the beginning of the days. And I believe that we will be a part of that. But I believe in all of these prophecies, and I believe that it is going to happen. But our job is to preach the gospel, the mercy and the grace, and Jesus, and peace, to all of these people, and believe in it ourselves as Christians. I hope that this message has not offended anybody, and if it has, you can talk to me later if I have gotten any of my facts wrong. Generally what I find out is not that the facts are right or wrong, it's just how we interpret the facts. One group interprets them this way, the other group interprets them that way. I will leave you with these words. Pray for the peace in Jerusalem and for the peace in Palestine, because too many innocent children have died in the last few weeks, and that needs to stop. God bless you. Amen.